Okay, so Viet Cong tactics in the Vietnam War. OCR history, the opposite of the US tactics, of course. So, what tactics did the Viet Cong use in the Vietnam War? Well, I can tell you for a fact they were a lot better than the US ones. As you can imagine, if you live in Vietnam, you're going to have a better idea of the landscape, better idea of the best way to fight, and more importantly, you're going to be more motivated to fight because it's your country, right? Yeah. So, tactics they used. Number one of the ones, this one sort of factors into a lot of the other ones as well, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was essentially just a path through Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia that allowed the North Vietnamese bases of the Viet Cong to supply the rest of their war effort. They were getting weapons and supplies from Russia and China, who were also both communists, of course. So once these supplies could be shipped to the correct area by using this trail. Why was this trail so good? Well, frankly, it was huge for one thing, so it was difficult to see where anyone was at one time. It was 1,000 kilometers long. It was, pretty big. It also had several false routes running off it, so you never knew which one the correct one was. If you were America, sort of secret passages, stuff like that. No one actually knew where it was. And the canopy of trees, because this is a jungle kind of area, above it, pretty much meant that you couldn't even see from like an aerial perspective. You couldn't see down. Now, what this means is that the US couldn't possibly pinpoint at any chance. They couldn't pinpoint where these supplies were being shipped, where they were being carried. And so they could never really stop the Viet Cong being supplied with stuff. They couldn't do it. Simple as that. So that was a good tactic because it factors into the rest of it. So other tactics of the Viet Cong. At the start of the war, there was a lot more infiltration and sort of secret agency espionage stuff. You don't need to be too specific here, but they basically infiltrated South Vietnam. That's the main thing. The Viet Cong would go into villages, towns and cities in South Vietnam, and they would either attempt to cause a revolution, so they would attempt to convince South Vietnamese citizens and people to join the North Vietnamese effort and to revolt against the South Vietnam rule, the military government. Now, if we're talking about success, this wasn't particularly a brilliant tactic of the Viet Cong. In all fairness, it wasn't. It didn't do too much for them, but it was certainly something the US struggled to stop. In all fairness, but that's one of the tactics. There's not much you really to say other than that. Now, of course, the main thing which the Viet Cong did: guerrilla warfare. This is the entire reason the US lost this war. Pretty much, guerrilla warfare. What does that mean? Well, it's actually kind of similar to the meaning of a Cold War, but in a different sense. So a Cold War is a war that is fought indirectly. There are almost no direct conflict. However, the Vietnam War was a hot war. It was direct conflict. However, it was a very odd war in the following way. I would say this is one of the few wars that was ever fought like this, if the only one. It's one of the few wars in which the sides fought in completely different ways. The US tried to bomb, to tank, to plane, to ship, to fight. They wanted to fight like any other war. Whereas the Viet Cong played it smarter. They knew they could not win a direct war against the USA. They knew they couldn't do that because that would be stupid. No way do you win a war against the USA. This time the USA is the most sophisticated with weapons, with nuclear weapons, with ships, with planes, with everything to do with war. There is no way you win against the USA. So what do? They fought indirectly. But don't get confused, we're not talking about Cold War indirect. We're not really talking about secret agent sort of, tension rising. This is a war, but they fought it in small numbers, and they fought it by picking off each American troop. They really fought it at a slow and steady and not passive, but sort of a war of attrition more than anything else, constantly eroding away at America. That is guerrilla warfare. So what were the tactics they used within this? And this is the main thing you really need to know. Firstly, and I would say one of the massive things, punji traps. Punji traps are incredibly simple. They are incredibly simple, but they were also very, very effective. Incredibly effective. So here's what a punji trap is. I'm not joking here, it really is this simple. You would dig a hole in a place that a US soldier is likely to step on. You would then place sharpened bamboo sticks in that hole. You know, 5, 6, 7, depending on how big the punch trap is. So obviously that's going to hurt. And then you would basically poison them. And these are actually really disgusting. It could even be human excrement. Just anything which is toxic, basically. You know, or bad for humans. So animal poo, human poo, wee, just all sorts. Even sometimes synthesized or manufactured chemicals. Just anything at all would go in there with the bamboo sticks. After that, a small layer of sort of foliage, or usually like plants and stuff, or maybe like a layer of straw, something that blended in with the environment, camouflage, would be put over the top. That way, a US soldier comes here, puts his foot there, straight in there, gets his foot stuck in a punji trap. If you're really unlucky and it's a well-built one, that bamboo could go right through your foot. That is horrible, right? And you know, that's going to do some serious damage. That's going to take a guy out of combat completely. That's going to disable a whole one American soldier. And that might not seem like much, but when you think how little time and effort and resources are required to make a punji trap, that's amazing. So this is a really, really, really good tactic, and the Viet Cong only got better at it as the war went on. They refined it in a way. They made them harder to spot with better camouflage. Everyone, all of them got really good at sharpening the bamboo sticks. All these things, they just improved over time because they got better at it. There is a statistic I have here actually. Yeah, 11%. That's, you know, more than a tenth of American deaths in the Vietnam War were caused by traps. Not all punji traps, but traps. That's crazy. That's a whole tenth of the American troops. And think how many of them were in there, gone, without you even having to fight them. I think that's pretty good for the Viet Cong. Punji traps weren't the only traps, but the main one you need to really, know about. There was also tin can traps and fuel tank traps. I will talk about fuel tank traps just briefly. It's pretty simple. All they would do is just put explosive in a car or van's engine, in their sort of petrol. You don't need to know the specifics, just in the engine. And so essentially, of course, you start up the car, that causes a spark, that lights the explosive, and boom, you kill everyone in the car and anyone around it. That's, equally as efficient as a punji trap. You don't need much, just an explosive. And the best thing about the fuel tank traps, you don't even need a particularly big explosive, because of course, as soon as the explosive goes off, it sets the actual petrol on fire as well. So you don't even need much. You just need like a tiny piece of explosive and boom. So yeah, it was pretty damn good. They were pretty damn good with their tactics with the Viet Cong. If we're talking objectively, that is of course the main reason why they won.